Hey everybody, this is Matt from Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, and today I'm going to be continuing my series of my countdown of the top 100 fantasy books of all time. And today we're going to be going through number 80 through 71. So let's start off with number 80, and that's going to be Empire of the Vampire by Kristoff. This is the first in a new series of his that just came out in 2021, and I am obsessed with this book. And I'm blown away because I really didn't think I was going to enjoy it. This book got recommended to me by a viewer. I did a random raffle where people could submit names of books, and this one won, and I was rather disappointed because I don't really enjoy vampires in my stories. And to hear that in just the title, it feels so cringeworthy of a title for somebody that just doesn't like vampires. But I was blown away within the first few pages because of how well these characters have been written and how good the writing quality is. It's mind-blowing. You know, this book starts off feeling like that framing narrative, like Kingkiller Chronicle is, where you have a main character telling a story to somebody else. And the story keeps jumping back when he's telling the story, going to kind of the first person, but then every now and then they jump forward in time to this story being told. I love that technique in a story, and many stories have done it before and after Kingkiller Chronicle, but when it's done well, it can really amplify a story, and that's where it really was done here. You know, this is at its heart an epic fantasy story. You know, it's about the most famous vampire hunter of all time, and he's part vampire himself, and that's who vampires are in this world. And he's essentially on a quest is humanity's last hope. You know, it's a quest for the Holy Grail, which has a lot of twists and turns in it. But it's telling a story of this vampire hunter growing up and becoming more famous and more famous, trying to take down the entire empire of the vampire. And it's so well done. The writing quality is just delicious. I love the way that things are described in the story. I love the technique. And it's done, I feel like, even better than Kingkiller Chronicle is, this framing aspect, because it jumps forward not just at the beginning of chapters, but you'll have this interesting thing happen in the writing where this character will be talking about something and then instantly it'll completely jump out of that story being told to have a dialogue between these two characters in present tense, and then immediately jump back again. And it will do this sometimes several times in a chapter, and it's kind of jarring at the beginning, but as it gets going along, there's just such charm to it that I love everything about it. So even if you don't like vampires like me, I think that you may thoroughly enjoy this story. The world is just so well done. I do suggest you get the physical book, though, instead of the audiobook. I think the audiobook actor was very good. I listened to audiobook, but afterwards I found out that the physical book actually has tons of illustrations, many illustrations throughout. And I think it would really help amplify the story, and you don't want to miss out on those. Even though they're not like done in the completely perfect style for me, it feels a little more like cartoonish. But it's really fun, and I wish I would have done the physical book. And if I read it again, I certainly will. So let's move to number 79. And this is a book that I just got done reading. And this is Mother of Learning Arc 2 by Domagoj, Kuramaic. And this was written in 2019. This is a story of a time loop. I kind of think like Groundhog's Day, where you have a character that wakes up finding themselves stuck, and they have to repeat the same day over and over again. But instead of a day, it's like a month in this story. And it does a lot of things that I love. You know, it's got a mage school. That's where the heart of this story takes place. I love a good school setting. I'm a sucker for it, and it's done really well here. I love a time jump story, and I've never read one before. I understand there's probably quite a few fantasy books that have this as an element. I've never read them before, but I was fascinated by Groundhog's Day as a little boy, and it's so fun going down that journey again in a fantasy setting that I love. But unlike Groundhog's Day, you don't have this character just trying to uncover the mystery of what's going on with the time jump and how do I get out of it. But at the end of the time jump, a major event happens. And I don't want to ruin anything about the story because I think you should read it. But the character not only wants to get out of the time jump, they want to get out of it in the right way. They need to end this loop in a way that doesn't ruin things. And so they don't want to jump out of the time jump without trying to figure out this greater mystery of what's going on in the world and without destroying things. And it's just it's so well done. You know, I think you read this story if you're looking for a good plot. This is what this story is. You know, the writing quality is not incredible. The characters aren't incredible, but the world is. The plot is. And I think there's so much that people would find good about this book that you should really give it a chance. And I think that you can find this entire book for free online. This was a web serial that is turning into books now, but the series is all done. It's split up into 3 major arcs. This is the second one. I haven't read the 3rd arc, but I imagine, based on what I've heard, that I'm probably going to be absolutely floored by the way this story goes, and I really can't wait to read that last arc. Number 78 is going to be the Crimson Campaign. This is the 2nd book in the Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McClellan, written in 2014. And oh my gosh, more people need to read the Powder Mage. It's one of the most underrated fantasy trilogies of all time, in my opinion. You know, I liken this book a lot in this series to The First Law. It has a lot of differences, but it felt that same grand multi-POV, kind of darker setting, a lot of characters that are not, you know, perfectly good or bad. There's a lot of flawed characters, and it's just so well done. I love the epic feel of the story that goes beyond just a little event in a little place, but into the greater world. This 2nd book in the series, this is a trilogy, but there are essentially 2 trilogies in the Powder Mage. There's another trilogy that happens that was written later about events on another continent. Some of the characters are the same. I don't love that trilogy as much. You're not going to find any of those books in my top 100, but the first trilogy is where it's at for me. And this 2nd book is better than the first book in every conceivable way. The pacing is brilliant. It is explosively fast, but it doesn't go at a breakneck speed where you can't slow down and appreciate these characters. It investigates the same 4 POVs that the first book did, so you get to understand way more about these characters and what makes them who they are. It opens the world in a much grander way. This is a flintlock fantasy, and I've never read another flintlock fantasy, but I imagine there's several of them if there's a whole title for this subgenre. But think like Napoleonic era, where you have people with like long rifles that need powder to shoot. That's the kind of world that they're trying to craft here. But there is a very well thought out magic system involving gunpowder that I don't really want to ruin for you. I think it's very special though. And what this book is about is the first pages open up to a coup has already happened. And the main character, one of the main characters, is the guy that initiated the coup. And so it's successful, and he finds himself in power now. And he's trying to deal with the conspiracies that are popping up. He's trying to deal with war in neighboring countries. And he's trying to deal with this situation happening where another country is essentially trying to summon a god that could spell drama and major problems for everybody that is not them. I love every single POV here. There is one POV that I don't love quite as much because it's kind of more of like a mystery story. There's like a detective trying to like a whodunit kind of story. I'm not big into those kind of stories, but if you are kind of a mystery fan, it's probably going to be your favorite POV of the bunch. But yeah, I can't say enough positive things about the Powder Mage, and I urge you to give it a shot, especially if you've read the First Law and wondering, you know, what are other books kind of like this? This is the book for you. So number 77 is going to be Blackflame. This is the 3rd book in the Cradle series by Will Wight, written in 2017. Cradle is a 12-book series. There's been 11 books out so far. The 12th book is going to come out later this year. And yeah, you're going to see a lot of Cradle books on this list. A lot have already come, and there's several still to come. But this is one of my favorite ones, because this is where the world really starts to expand, and you really start to understand the greater story that's going on in this world. Cradle summed up really quickly. This is the most famous progression fantasy that there is. In progression fantasy, think like an RPG video game, where you have a character that continues to level up, and they get more powerful on a regular progression. They don't have these major steps back in power, and at the end of every book, they're in a much stronger position than when they started in. And while that feels like you already kind of know what's going to happen, and you know that while they may have little step backs, you know that eventually they're going to take 2 steps forward. But it's addicting. It's addicting in the way that like World of Warcraft is, where you just can't put it down. It's kind of like crack. There's a reason they call Cradle Crackle, because it truly, you can't put these books down. They're so short that you can fly through these books in a day or two, and you won't even realize that you finished the book. It's just, you'll fly through these things. But I love that the veil is getting lifted on the story at this point, where the characters are moving to different locations. They're outside of their little bubble now, and getting to understand who the bad guys are, getting to understand the world. And yeah, I'll always cherish this story for what it's done in expanding things. So number 76 is going to be Age of Myth. This is in the Rhaenyra world, specifically the Legends of the First Empire series by Michael J. Sullivan, written in 2016. And this is the first of 6 books in Legends of the First Empire. So to give you a little bit of background, a lot of people have heard of Rhaenyra. Not as many of this series, because Rhaenyra is about Hadrian and Royce. It's a buddy fantasy story between 2 thieves. Well, not necessarily thieves. One of them's like a warrior. But this series is not about that. This series takes place hundreds, if not thousands of years before the events of that. None of the characters are the same, but it deals with the same lore in the world. And I really like that the author decided to not continue to go down that trap of writing only about the things that have worked, but they went back and said, I have a bigger story I wanted to tell. And this is one of my favorite Rhaenyra books. I didn't love the progression that this story went throughout the series. I still would recommend it to people, but I think this first book was the best of the bunch. It's just such a fun story. In this book, you have the Frey, and these are, think elves, but they're not called elves yet. That'll change later on, but they are very clearly elves. And there's humans, and the humans look at these elves like they're gods, because they can't die. They live like forever, and they hold these humans like subjugated. But in the first chapter, a human kills one of the Frey, and it causes enormous drama because the humans now understand they're not invincible. Maybe we can rise up, and the Frey decide we have to crush this rebellion before it gets going. And I don't want to say anything more than that because I don't want to spoil anything. I think everything I just said would show up on the back cover, so I don't consider that a spoiler. But yeah, it's so good. This is one of the books that is done in graphic audio format, and I highly recommend it. Graphic audio is where it's audio book, but every single character has a different specific voice actor. And there's background noises, instead of a book saying, Matt opened a door, they would just make a door sounding like it's opening up. And it makes it feel like you're listening to like a play. And it's highly entertaining. And while I do love, in general, graphic audios, I think this is one of the best ones that I've ever listened to. So, yeah, if you can get your hands on it, they're very expensive though, and you can try to find one at your library. That's how I got mine, and it's on Hoopla actually. I think everybody has access to Hoopla because you can, if you live in America, the Washington D.C., everyone in America can get access to their Hoopla accounts because they represent the entire country, and it is on the Washington D.C. Hoopla. So highly recommended you check that one out. Number 75 is going to be Fool's Errand. This is in the realm of the Elderlings, fits in the Fool trilogy, written by Robin Hobb in 2002. In the greater realm of the Elderlings, this is the 7th of 16 books, but in the Fits in the Fool trilogy, this is the first book. Realm of the Elderlings is 5 different series split up into 16 total books, 4 trilogies, 1 4-book, whatever you call a 4-book series. Don't know the name of them. And quartet, that's right. And yeah, this book follows Fitz. And so Fitz is the main character in the first trilogy, in Farseer. And then it takes a break and tells a different story about a different part of the world in Lifeship Traders. And then it goes back in this series to tell Fitz's story again. And in this series, Fitz is a lot older. I love the time jump that has happened here. that the author didn't feel the need to fill in every single little gap, that you have a much older character that has changed very much from the person that he was in the first books because of the events and the trauma that this character went through in those first 3 books. I don't want to say anything more than that because I don't want to ruin anything. But you read Robin Hobb because of her characters and her prose. Specifically the characters. I don't think there's ever been a fantasy writer that has ever written better characters than Robin Hobb has. And you know what? I'll go further. I'll say most definitely nobody ever has. Every single character in this series, even side characters, are magical in the way that they're written. And these are tear-jerker books where not everything bad happens, but it feels like real life. It feels like the drama that you would expect out of real life. And these characters go through these events where you don't know right from wrong, which I think is the hallmark of a good story, when it's not clear and there's no good choice and there's no bad choice. There's just choices. And the author doesn't try to tell you how to feel. She just lets you feel it based on how well that she writes things. This story is an extremely slow build. I've heard this book criticized because of how slow it is. For me personally, I thoroughly enjoyed it for what it was. I liked the slow build. But I could also read a Robin Hobb book about nothing, and I'd still enjoy it based on how good she writes. But, beware of that. But if you've already read Farseer, you have to go read this trilogy. It's incredible. And this is the worst book of the trilogy. And for it to show up in my top 100, you gotta check it out. So if you have not read Realm of the Elderlings, or if you read Farseer and you finished that last book and said, man, I don't know if this series is for me, I felt the same way, because the last book in that first trilogy was not amazing, but this book is. And almost every book after this point is also. And because that third book is one of the weakest books in the entire 16. So keep going, you won't be disappointed. Number 74 is going to be another Cradle book. This is Uncrowned by Wight in 2019. And this book is, I don't know which one it is, but it might be like number 8 in the series. I think that's right. And this book is about one thing. It's such a contained story, but it's about a major tournament. And the main characters in this series have all come together to participate in this huge worldwide tournament against the greatest fighters of the generation, the younger generation. And they're fighting for glory. They're fighting for prizes. And the prizes are incredibly well written. They're unique. You can't help but wonder what the prizes are going to be, because they don't tell you. They just say, every round that you get further, something amazing is going to happen. Some crazy thing you're going to get. And I won't ruin anything, because every single one of them is just mouth-watering. But the weakest of the prizes, I will say, is that you get your own floating island, fortress. And that's the weakest prize. And so it only goes up from there. It's so fun to read about. I love a good tournament story, and that's all this book is. Fight after fight after fight. They're so well done. The magic in the story is incredible. It all kind of comes to a head here. You can't wait to read about these. It's almost like you're reading really in-depth human-like Pokemon battles, because of how, what magic system is going to succeed against this type of magic system, and what are they going to do to counter that. And yeah, it's just, I ate this book up in like a day, and I'll always remember it for, how well I was intrigued by these fights. And I don't know that I've ever read a book with better fight sequences than I did in Uncrowned. Number 73 is The Path of Daggers. This is the 8th book in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan, written in 1998. And I think a lot of people that have read Wheel of Time are going to say, how is this book on your top 100? Because this book is the first in the slog. And the slog is 3 books kind of in the middle of this series that everybody recognizes as the weakest and the hardest to get through because of how slow that they go. You will continually hear about the slog. And I am one that is going to say right here, the slog is a lie. It is not a slog. It's a wonderful series. And even these 3 books, there is so much to like about them. Yes, it is slower. But is that a bad thing? Do you need every book to be lightning fast? I don't. I like a good story that slows down, especially a longer story that you can investigate characters in more depth. And I love that about this book. It is slower though. I will admit that. The pacing is not, it is steady pacing because most of the book is slow. But, I believe that the major reason that this book and the two following it got such a bad rap is because of the people that read these books when they first came out. I could understand being disappointed of waiting for a really long time. You get this book on release day, you eat it up, and you're like, the story didn't progress a lot. And now I have to wait for years for the next one to come out. That would be disappointing. But if you're reading this story nowadays, when you could just pick up the next book the moment you finish the last page of the previous one, it takes away all of the negative things about that wait period. There is no wait period. You can just get the next book right away. And so, I did think that one of the books in the slog is like my least favorite of the series. Crossroads of Twilight. But it's still a good story. And this book, Path of Daggers, is wonderful. Number 72 is Soldiers Live. This is the last book in the Black Company series by Glen Cook, written in 2000. And there have been other books written after this, but they take place in a different time period. This is the last from a narrative perspective. This is where the story finally wraps up. The Black Company is a series about a band of mercenaries, and they take a contract for whoever wants to pay them. If they're good, if they're bad, they don't care. They're just trying to make money. By this point in the series, they have taken a huge diverging path, and they're forging forward and trying to go back to their origin of what made the Black Company the Black Company. The Black Company has been around for hundreds of years. The people that are in this, the only way that they know about the history of them is because they always have an analyst, somebody that writes the diary of what's happening, and they keep them forever. But the diaries have been lost. Some of the early ones have been lost, and so they desperately want to know and go back to what their founding was. And this book finally wraps up that story. The fantasy elements are wrapped up to 1,000% in this story. I can't really say a lot more than that without ruining things that have gone on, but I can say that the ending of The Black Company is one of my most cherished endings to a fantasy story of all time. I have read some opinions that disagree with that they felt like it was disappointing. I don't agree with that at all. I thought it just held my mind in such wonder. And I loved the direction that this went and the way that the story wrapped up. If you have not read The Black Company, I don't know what you're doing. This is a foundational piece of fantasy that I think everybody needs to read. It's the most important fantasy work from the 80s, in my opinion. Even though this book was written in 2000, the series started in the 80s. And it made Malazan what it is. I mean, Malazan's Book of the Fallen's author, Steven Erikson, has regularly cited that this book is a major inspiration of his. So gotta check out The Black Company. Number 71 is going to be Fool's Quest. This is the second book in the Fitz and the Fool trilogy in the realm of the Elderlings, written in 2015. And there's not a lot more I can say because I already talked about the previous book. But I will say that the story just continues to impress here. It goes further. You start really realizing what this trilogy is actually about. The pacing is a little bit slower, but you're learning more about the world. And by the time this story ends, even though this book does have some middle book syndrome, you're so interested in how that last story is going to pick up because it ends, this major quest that has to happen. The reason that it has to happen. You can't wait to read it. The payoff's going to be huge. But I just love so much about the story. I loved it more than the first book in the trilogy. But you're going to see the last book in this trilogy later on in this top 100. So there is number 80 through 71. A week from today, I will be releasing the next 10, and we'll keep on marching down this path until we get to number 1. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and happy reading to you.